Hello, and welcome to RRI Explained, a Resbios podcast. It is the aim of the Resbios project to embed responsible research and innovation, or RRI, into 4 universities across Europe, in the hope of improving the interconnectivity between science research and society, with a particular focus on the biosciences. But what is RRI exactly? Well, hopefully we can find out together. Today we're joined by André Martinuzzi, who's the EU Project Coordinator for the Living Innovations Project. Thank you for joining us today, André.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
I was just wondering for our audience if you could give us an overview of your background and the Living Innovations Project.
My background is in sustainability management. I worked in this area since the late 1990s. Worked on issues as sustainability management, corporate social responsibility, and circular economy. In working in this area, we've seen that in the innovation, sustainability innovation and responsible innovation is a key issue for the future of the business sector, but also for the future of mankind. And this is why we approached about 10 years ago this community of responsible research and innovation, where we first coordinated a project for small and medium-sized enterprises called Compass Project. And nearly in parallel, we initiated a project called Living Innovation that addressed major companies of the digital sector. And the purpose of this project was to promote RRI in the business sector and to allow companies to experiment with RRI as a business opportunity.
So that's really interesting because we hear a lot about RRI in relation to in research institutes and universities, but less so within a business sense. So were there any reservations from the business leaders when it came to kind of implementing this RRI and including it into their business models? And do you think their views have changed since taking part in the Living Innovations Project?
I think that's even on a broader scale beyond just the scope of our partners. I think in industry in general, you find a lot of companies that are committed towards sustainability and responsibility. They put these terms into their strategies, into their business agendas, but then they struggle with implementing these commitments in their different functional areas. So you find sustainability management in marketing, you find sustainability management in reporting, in controlling, but actually in innovation, you don't find a lot of cases where companies really successfully implemented sustainability and responsibility in their innovation activities. The bigger question is why? Because actually shaping the future does not happen by sustainability reporting. It happens by product development, technology development, research, and innovation. So it's important if we want to change the future for the better, if we want to even change the direction of companies and of consumers, because what companies offer actually are patterns and practices that consumers then can take up. This is the key point. We have to integrate sustainability and responsibility into innovation management, into innovation practices. On the other hand, we see that corporate sustainability management often lacks innovative approaches. They tend to report about what companies already do. They tend to increase the efficiency. They tend to play a little bit around with eco products in very small market niches. But making sustainability management more innovative and innovation management more responsible. This has been the basic challenge. And I think it's still the challenge for many, many companies. If you look at what's happening in industry, you find a lot of sustainability managers and innovation managers, but really in very rare cases, they really collaborate.
Can you describe how the work that Living Innovations has done with these business partners to try and integrate these RRI practices into the work they do? And how has the Living Innovations Project incorporated citizens' needs? Obviously, a lot of businesses are very used to business communications, but perhaps less so getting ideas from society itself.
I think these are two very important questions that the answers would take hours. So we'll try to make it short and separate both questions. The first question is, what have we done to make companies aware of RRI and to show to them that responsible innovation is a business opportunity? And I think what we've done is, first of all, we talk their language. I think that RRI scholars and RRI practitioners working with public organizations, with funding organizations, with policymakers, developed a certain kind of language during the last 10 years that's quite distant to the logic, the narrative, and the terms of companies. So linking it back to the language of the business sector and to their core interests, and to find a new narrative for responsible innovation that links up to the business sector has been our biggest challenge and one of our biggest achievements as well. So actually what we've done is we got rid of the keys. We've tried to overcome the terminology of the European Commission that focuses on 5 areas, 5 keys, which we think to a large extent are not really transferable and understandable and applicable in the business sector. Let me give you a few examples. When you talk about science education, then science education is very important for universities. If you talk about science education with companies, they're puzzled. They just want to know, well, what do you want us to do? Shall we invest in our human resources? Shall we come up with some kind of apprenticeship programs? Do you want us to sponsor a university chair? But this is all that they could understand in the area of science education. They are not science education organizations. Then you have this issue of openness, open innovation, open source. It's very specific niche. Open source is an issue in the industry sector. In most other areas, there is a contradiction between openness and intellectual property right protection. If you develop something, you have a natural tendency to put a patent on it, to protect it. And now if you say every innovation has to be shared with humanity, with everybody, because that's responsible, that is quite difficult for a company that its profits depends on strategic success factors. And having patents is a strategic success factor that they have to protect and actually to monopolize. Every company does so. So if you approach them, and the third one, let's take just a third example, gender issues. For many companies, this is a very specific area of diversity. And diversity has many dimensions. Diversity regarding age, religion, sexual orientation, and so on. And gender is just one of them. And they simply ask the question, why do you highlight gender so much? We have so many different diversity criteria. Why picking out one? And even one more example, the Commission added another key and said, and sustainability. Sustainability is such a broad term and such a broad area of goals and issues. If you say and sustainability, you simply incorporate 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals being broken down to 169 operational objectives, and you say, and this has to be considered as well. It simply doesn't fit to what companies do. So what we try to do is we try to keep our roots in RRI while translating it to opportunity-driven approach and an approach that's understandable for business. And actually we translated it into a quite simple narrative. We said, first of all, as a company, you are responsible for your impact. You already accepted this because the standard definition of corporate social responsibility is you are responsible for your impacts. And as many companies have CSR or sustainability commitments and reports, they say, okay, we feel responsible for our impacts. So it's quite easy to say, and you're responsible for the impacts of your innovations. So this responsibility beyond corporate boundaries, beyond present, for the future, for the innovations. That's simply a translation of CSR to the innovation management area. And then you have anticipation incorporated as well. You have all these roots of technology assessment that we are so well know in the RRI sector. Second, with the people and for the people. Open innovation as a basic idea they already understand, but many companies misunderstand open innovation or implement open innovation in a very cautious way. when you talk to them, they say, yeah, we are open for citizen involvement and for citizen science and whatever. And actually, whom do they involve? Their own employees and their family members, because they have to. So how to orchestrate, how to organize real open co-creation processes. That's the second thing. And it goes back to the participation aspect, to the aspect that society aims for innovations which are desirable and acceptable. So it again goes back to fundamental understanding of RRI, but translated into a language that the business sector understands. It's a kind of open innovation 2.0. Mm-hmm. And then we have a third aspect, and that's more rooted in the sustainability debate than in the responsibility debate, which is about making whole systems more sustainable and not just to improve or incrementally innovate on individual technologies. It's perceiving systems as an object of innovation. And this means not just business to business relationship. This means whole system design, designing mobility systems, designing food systems, designing healthcare systems, not just by adding one more technology, but by co-creating whole systems. So these three elements are the three elements of our core narrative for businesses on responsible innovation, which means anticipate future impacts, co-create with the people and for the people, and perceive yourself as part of a system that you are capable of understanding, improving, and managing. And this new narrative is something that perfectly links up with the interest of companies and with their language and with their understanding. It addresses very different parts of a company. It addresses innovation managers, it addresses CSR managers and sustainability managers, but it also is quite easy to understand and even quite attractive for CEOs.
No, that's really interesting, because a few weeks ago I was speaking to René van Stromberg about the history and the future of RRI, and he said something very similar about the RRI keys. They were a necessity when coming up with the framework, because you need to put something down on writing, and so it can be explained as a concept, but they can be quite narrowing, and they could feel like hoops for companies, especially to jump through. So kind of expanding upon them and having that kind of scope for having a bit of wiggle room to become a bit more bespoke to the company needs is a really interesting point. I was wondering if you could give some examples of companies, how they've actively incorporated these kind of initiatives into their business models.
Well, this goes back to your question about how we collaborated with companies and with citizens at the same time. Mm-hmm. And in our Living Innovation project, we perceived this as a kind of playground, testing ground for co-creating innovations with lay citizens and companies. So it was before the COVID crisis hit, we organized a dozen of real-life workshops. Then COVID, changed everything. Had to do all of this online, but it also gave us the opportunity to increase the number of events. So in total, then we organized more than 25 more events, virtual events, together with the companies on very different aspects and very different innovations. Let me give you a few examples. Siemens, for example, worked on how to help blind people and people with low vision to navigate through public transport. So actually, when you use public transport systems, and Siemens is a manufacturer that produces devices and produces trains and trams and so on, the challenge was how could blind and visually impaired people navigate through a whole system, a whole public transport system, not just use a bus or a tram, but could there be any device that helps them to navigate through the whole public space? And together with blind people and care organizations, they developed an app that helps blind and visually impaired people to know which bus is approaching, to make the bus stop, to find the right seat in the bus, to announce that they would like to get off at the next stop. All of this via this device, but it will now be extended to Ubers, taxis, and traffic lights. So it's really an open system that is able to extend towards different devices, different public transport elements, and that helps blind and visually impaired people to navigate in the public space. So that's one example. Another company dealt with the issue of home office and also regular office, and the problem of back pain because of sitting on not so well adapted chairs. And they developed a smart office chair with a lot of sensors that can show you how you sit in front of your computer and how this will affect your spine and your feeling and your health. And this is connected to a kind of feedback system that you can train the best sitting position. And this chair can be then rented or even being a kind of service instead of a product. A third case stems from Otto Bock, which is a world-leading manufacturer of wheelchairs and prostheses. And they established a user community of people who had an amputation and help, and this community, and they help with the help of this community, they help each other how to live a better life with a prosthesis. Now you could ask, why don't they use Facebook? Actually, they could use Facebook, but what we didn't know before is that they get harassed at Facebook, because there are some people who get aroused by people using a prosthesis. Mm-hmm. And imagine you have a prosthesis and you find out there is somebody else trying to pretend having a prosthesis while he's finding that really, really cool that you talk about your prosthesis. I wouldn't have expected that this is a real problem. Mm-hmm. But this is a real problem. So you need a very well facilitated platform where you can have a kind of access control to get rid of these people who might infiltrate your Facebook community. So Otto Bock, as a large manufacturing company, extended their responsibility from just manufacturing a prosthesis to supporting people who live their daily life with a prosthesis and to improving their daily life conditions.
So it feels like it's just taking a very much more holistic approach to developing these technologies. It's looking at the beginning, the middle, of the end user product and experience, but also just taking into account, you could have a boardroom full of certain people, and unless you have you need to have the societal input to really get a full picture of how these products and these resources are used in the long term, really. I suppose it reminds me of I was reading kind of a book called Invisible Women, where they were taken into account. They were talking about toilet space, equal amounts for men and equal amounts for women, which seems equitable until you think about it a little bit more and the inherent additional needs that women have using bathrooms. And by just extending kind of that outreach and that kind of input from just who's in your boardroom and your small select group of experts or advisors to a more community-based thing, you just get a wider picture of how your product is going to be used and the issues people might face with it.
I think responsible innovation in the business sector has two different aspects. One aspect is to boost creativity and get a deeper insight into the user needs, into the societal demands, into future trends. So it's better listening to people and better predicting future trends. So it increased your creativity. On the other hand, you consider potential negative future impacts, and this decreases the number of potential solutions. Actually, then you do not implement something that might harm future generations or any kind of unpredicted or not considered negative impact. You have to get rid of these solutions. Otherwise, we could have spared the problem of asbestos if we would have done that before, and we could have actually even spared the problem of nuclear waste that we will have to take care of for 100,000 years, clearly knowing what impacts these innovations will have on future generations. So on one hand, towards a company, you have to increase the numbers and then to decrease the numbers. If you just decrease the numbers and you just say, get rid of this solution and this one, because this is not responsible, this is not sustainable, for a company, that's not an option. You have first to increase the number of options and then to sort them out. So this is why these two things always have to go in parallel. I think in the RRI community, especially in the community that's driven by ethics, by concerns, by sort of kind of fears, they tend to reduce the number of options And without first increasing it, they are perceived as killjoys by the companies.
I've never heard it described that way, but it's really interesting because, with the keys as they are, they kind of narrow down options for, I don't know, for this instance, sort of business plans and that sort of thing. But by having the co-creation process and working with communities, you can then expand upon them, and then kind of knowledge of crowds kind of whittle them down to better options rather than just sort of like, going down this bottleneck of only a few perhaps poor ideas, perhaps.
Yeah. We have seen certain limitations, no doubt about that. We've seen that companies who work in a quite large distance from users, from citizens, from consumers, they have quite difficulties dealing with the co-creation and involvement and participatory approach. So for example, if you take a semiconductor manufacturer, that's super interesting. Producing semiconductors, computer chips, but they're so far away from their application. Why should they and how should they involve citizens in designing new computer chips? That's, for them, that's not an issue, and it's completely understandable that this is not an issue. So it's similar as we see in research. If you look for really blue sky research, fundamental research, also in this area, responsibility for future impact is difficult because you never know what happens with your groundbreaking insight in 20 years from now. So either it's distant regarding time or it's distant regarding value chains. The more distant you are to citizens, the more distant you are to impacts, the more difficult it is for a company to take care of it.
So what have been the key outcomes from the Living Innovation Project? And how do you envisage sort of keeping this mentality alive beyond the institutes that you've worked with, beyond the companies that you've worked with? Do you see it kind of having legs and spreading towards other businesses and being incorporated by other industry leads within their business models?
First of all, we've built up a user community within the project that goes far beyond the corporate partners. Within the Living Innovation Project, we've built up a community of practice of nearly 2,000 members coming from the business sector, from consultancies, but also from research. They were heavily engaging with our industry partners and with our university partners within the project, and we think that we can keep this community alive. So that's a community of practice. Then we have some tangible outcomes. As I said before, smart office chair, navigation app for visually impaired and blind people. We also have toolbox for how to facilitate workshops with blind people and visually impaired people. So that's a toolbox, how you can ensure that you not by using certain tools, you exclude people with low vision. Because as a matter of fact, many facilitators, they want to work in an inclusive manner, but they don't have the tools how to do so. So there are tangible outcomes of the project that we already disseminated and where we think the project will continue, the impact of the project will continue via these outcomes. We have a co-creation toolbox that supports companies how to really co-create with citizens. We have cases how to run innovation workshops with families from low-income areas, so how to involve children from poor families. That's also structural exclusion that we have to overcome. So there are a lot of tools that came out. We have some innovations that are really tangible because we think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And if we would just have processes and tools and toolboxes, you have to show that something came out. We have this, and we developed a video series of 10 high-end videos showing our most important, our key outcomes of the project that you find on our website. It's www.living-innovation.eu.
No, that's fantastic. I've looked through your resources and they're great. It's a great resource, and you should be very proud of it. How has your perspective on, we've kind of touched upon this a little bit with when we were talking about the RRI keys, but I just wanted to learn a little bit more about how your perspective has changed through 20 years of working for EU projects and in innovation. Has your opinion changed on it? And where do you see it going in the future, perhaps?
Well, first of all, I got a deeper and deeper understanding of the different views of different people, different communities. I think, yeah, sometimes I introduce myself nowadays not saying I'm a management expert or I'm a professor. I make jokes about it and I'm a professional community hopper. Knowing the logics, knowing the narratives, knowing the interests of different groups, I think is most important, especially in this area where you try to collaborate across boundaries, societal boundaries, quadruple helix. You have to really understand the logic of a research organization compared to the logic of a private for-profit organization. And even within a company, there are different logics of innovators and, for example, also innovation managers. 5 years ago, I thought, okay, that's corporate sector and it's innovation. But there's a huge difference between the ones who would like to innovate. These are the garage guys, the techno nerds, the screwdriver guys who want to do it. They put something together and they're so super happy if it works. They have just one mission. It worked. We didn't blow it up. Let's make it bigger. That's their mission. Then you have the innovation management guys. We learned about innovation management and they have a huge toolbox with a lot of different tools. They are the tools fetishists. They would like to use their tools to steer the techno nerds because they have a deep feeling that the techno nerds shouldn't be left alone in the garage. They need processes, they need tools. And if you would like to promote responsible innovation towards these two different groups, you have to find two different narratives, although both work in the same company. And it's then different with the sustainability managers and the CSR managers. Again, a different species, a different community. So on first sight, you would say, that's all business sector. But the closer you come, the more you see the details and the more you see how the story of responsibility and sustainability has to be adapted without losing the basis, the ground, the roots, but to a logic and to a narrative of the respective target group.
I suppose it's this issue of bridging theory and practice, I suppose. So you can write up about innovation and RRI, but when you actually bridge that to practical boots on the ground, people working in factories, people working in workshops, it takes a to and fro to really see this vision of innovation just sort of, especially in kind of this sustainable way. People in the workshops just want to get things done. They don't want to be kind of cow-tied by regulation XYZ, but also without kind of like that driving force of, it's kind of putting blinkers on a horse a little bit.
Well, there are two more things that I found quite interesting. First of all, I'm quite hesitant to call it RRI anymore, because I think that responsible research and responsible innovation are rather different areas. And if you put both into the same term, to my experience, the idea of responsible research dominates, while the application in responsible innovation is then just taken as the same. But actually, RRI discourse is dominated by scientists and by policymakers. So they have their own logic, they have their own language. When you look at RRI scientists, many of them are philosophers. Now, if you send philosophers to companies and tell them, now we call you consultants, you see that they have a different language, they have a different way of thinking. This is why not so many philosophers act as consultants. So I think we have, it's to my impression, it's better to talk about responsible research and responsible innovation, and for the business sector, first to talk about responsible innovation. And if you then talk about research as well, it's okay. But the term RRI as such is not well understood. It's not branded, it's not existing. And the first challenge that you have is to promote your acronym, put communication efforts into saying, yeah, I have to explain to you what RRI is. Talk their language. Talk about responsible innovation. This is what they understand. They know that they're responsible and they know that they would like to innovate. So I'd like to not hide, but not to put RRI up front as a term, because it's not well established. You talk about acronyms nobody understands. I think one of the biggest challenges right now is that you could even call it a term that approached the end of its product life cycle. I dramatically miss RRI and Horizon Europe.
Mm-hmm. That's not the first.
It was a key term of Horizon 2020, and I think it's now integrated everywhere. But the question is this a step forward, or does it just mean that it gets lost? And I have certain fears that the product life cycle of RRI is nearly over, while the term as such is not even well established in industry.
That's not the first time I've heard that, actually. So it's very interesting that you bring it up. And perhaps it will evolve into something else, or perhaps other practices will kind of usurp it and it will just be engulfed by something else. But no, that's really interesting.
Well, this is why we're quite happy that we never put the RRI term so upfront, and we always talked about responsible innovation. I think the key issues of responsibility and innovation will still be relevant for companies for years and even decades, while the term RRI, the brand, might now run the risk of being lost.
I think I've kind of come to the end of my questions. So I just wanted to ask you, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't really brought up yet?
Okay. The Living Innovation Project delivered a new narrative for responsible innovation in the business sector and translated this into a business case that shows that responsible innovation is a business opportunity and not an additional burden. We developed a set of different tools, from co-creation tools to inclusive innovation tools to tools how to involve beyond the usual suspects, to involve families from low-income areas, or also to involve people with blind people and people with low vision into co-creation processes. And we built up a powerful community of practitioners working in responsible innovation in industry. And if you'd like to join, visit our website. There will be some upcoming webinars, even beyond the funding period of Living Innovation.
Thank you very much for joining us, André.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
The Resbios project is funded by the EU with the grant number 872146. To learn more about the Resbios project and the other pillars of RRI, please go to resbios.eu. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.